Okay, so I thought I'd start with the assessment. So, hang on, let me just check my speaker. Can you just say something? Oh, that's way better.
You can hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Because I was just trying to test my microphone as well to check it wasn't me. But, yeah.
You are fading in and fading out a bit, but basically I do get you, so mostly. So this is assignment 2 that I thought I'd start off with discussing assignment 2 because it is the beginning of week 4, so that gives people a couple of weeks to write, and this is about the time that people usually write. The good thing about this assessment is that the work that you've done in the discussion forums actually feeds into it. So it's a reflective paper, and we've been doing lots of reflecting in the discussion forums. So hopefully you're on board for this, all of you, not just you, Cara. So what you need to do for this assignment is just select a developmental period in your own life, so maybe toddlerhood, childhood, adolescence, or any other period that you go through. And I know that there's quite a lot of people in this class who are kind of like around my age, so in an older phase of their lives as well. So we've got plenty to choose from. If you're a little bit younger, you obviously don't have as much to choose from. I would suggest that if it was me writing it, I would probably choose to do the period that I'm in right now, because that's probably resonating more for you than earlier childhood periods, but that may not be the case, and you're welcome to choose any of them. Personally, I can't really remember my toddlerhood. Can you, Cara?
I actually have some quite vivid memories, even when I was 18.
Okay.
But,
okay, well then that...
Not enough to write an essay on.
Right. But I think some people do. So I know that, like, one of my sisters definitely does. I hardly remember anything. She goes, remember this, remember that? And it's like, no. No.
Yeah, some I do, but in saying that, there's things that I don't remember from 6 months ago. So.
We can all be like that. I picked up broccoli the other day in the supermarket and I was like, what's this called?
Yeah, you have those days, I guess.
Hi, Chris. Chris? Hi, Chris.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks.
I thought I'd just start with the assessment because it's week 4, and people generally like to start their assignments about now. Now's a good time to start them. And also, I was just saying to Cara before that it's a reflective paper, so it's basically picking up on what we've been doing in the discussion forums but writing that into an essay form. So does that make sense to you?
Yeah, so I've done a few last week, a few workshops and evening ones online on this group meeting thing, and yeah, they were about reflective. There's one all about reflective essays. So
awesome. Okay, so yeah, it's not just telling me what you've learned, it's showing me that you have actually connected with the core course concepts and that you understand them, but it's moving beyond that and taking them in and doing some analysis. But in this assessment, it's an analysis in terms of yourself rather than in terms of a case study or something else, which is something that you also might do in relation to the concepts we've been learning. So first of all, you need to choose a period in your life, like toddlerhood, childhood, adolescence, or any other period, one of the periods that we've kind of identified. And then we need to look at an overview of the selected developmental period. So the key events or milestones experienced at this time. And of course, when you're doing this, you also want to relate it to the literature that we've been reading. So here we'll talk about different key events or milestones experienced during different times of our lives. So make sure that you use some theory here. It's not just all about you just writing about your own experience. You first of all need to show me that you have read and understood the literature. So you need a discussion of the key aspects of each of the theories you've chosen to discuss. So the theories that you've just chosen to use to discuss or to analyse your own lives. And you need an analysis of the period that you've selected in light of each of the two theories that you choose. So you've got at least two major theorists in developmental psychology that you need to identify here. So following the analysis and discussion, you need to write a reflection on your own personal responses and experiences in relation to the significant period of your life. So in the essay, you need to name the period you are choosing and include an overview of this time in your life. You need to discuss key aspects of each of the developmental theorists that you've chosen to use in your assignment, and you need to analyse the period or event with reference to the major developmental period. And then, you need to reference the current literature and integration of relevant theory into your discussion. So you can't just have, this is the theory and this is my experience. You need to have, this is the theory and this is my experience, and the theory relates to my experience in this way. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. And also make sure that you reference properly. You lose marks when you don't reference properly. So there's Studiosity, which you'll see down the side of your Blackboard pages. Hang on, I'll just bring it up and find it for you. Is that someone's dog? So
I got the moment here. Hold on a sec. I'll be back shortly.
Yeah, all right. So there's where's it gone? Studiosity, which comes up. Does it come up on your front page when you log in?
It usually is there. I know where to find it if I need it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't find it.
I can't. I don't want to fiddle and then end up losing you.
Yeah, you might knock yourself out. But yeah, it generally comes up when you log in, doesn't it?
Yeah, or it's sometimes. Yeah, on that front. On
the front page, yeah. That's where I am actually. One faculty, no. Oh well, no. Anyway, it is here.
Yeah, it's in a few different places.
Yeah. It's probably because it's probably should be here. Maybe it should be down here. No. Anyway. I'm sure. Let me know if you can't find it. You should be able to find it quite easily. All right. Okay, so so make sure that you reference properly. You can also, you've also got your learning advisors that you can connect with. And don't forget, we've also got the library people for you. We've got the success coaches. We've got the counsellors. So anything that you need. And also, if anyone is going to need an extension, you need to check out the special consideration policy, which asks you for a medical certificate, etc. But also, if you're having any other kind of issues, or if you just need an extra day or whatever, just do email me. It's like, but email me before rather than afterwards, because then if you email me before, I can help you with something and we can see if we can work out a plan. If you email me after, it's often too late, and it's particularly at the end of trimester, because we don't have much time between the end of trimester when we have to mark our assessments and when they go through to exam committee and get ratified. So just do be aware. It's like, I know that we all have different pressures, but yeah, if you can be aware of them sooner rather than later, that's always good. Now I've recorded this this PowerPoint here and just uploaded that as well. So I just actually recorded this as an audio. I wrote it and read it as an audio recording because someone has asked me for some podcasts. So if everyone could have a look around for podcasts that relate to this subject, that would be fantastic. That was just a bit of an experiment for me, just writing something like that and reading it out. It's like, I don't know how much sense that makes to some people, but I know that some people really do just like to listen to things. So if you think it was a good experience, I will practice and try and get better at it and do more of those. Whereas I actually prefer to do something more like a lecture that you would have in the classroom. So this week we're looking at infancy and toddlerhood.
So when is this essay due?
Sorry?
When is this essay due? Like, when are we
week 6, at the end of week 6.
and we're in week 4 now.
We're at the beginning of week 4, so it gives you 2 weeks to write it.
Yep. Cool.
Which is about the right period of time. So what I would recommend if you haven't been studying much for a while, is that you sit down and you have a first go at it, and then you kind of give it a day or two and move away from it, and then come back to it and finish it off. Because otherwise you can become quite otherwise it can become quite stressful if you're not someone who's just really good and really successful at writing essays all in one go. So give yourself a bit of space. Make some notes. Look back on what you've written in the through the discussion forums and see if there's anything that you can take from there as well. You can't copy it word for word, but you can use some of the ideas that you might have been thinking through at the time. So let's go to the lecture in the beginning. Okay, lecture 4, infancy and toddlerhood. So the lecture notes I've already attached to the bottom of the page, and I will also attach this one to the bottom of page 4 as well, so that other people who aren't here today can listen to this in their own time. It's really hard to find a time when everyone can come together. So we're going to begin with the process of childbirth delivery. So when babies are being born, they produce a high level of cortisol, which is hydrocortisone, which is the stress hormone, because stress activates cortisol secretion from the adrenal glands. So small amounts of cortisol cause quick bursts of energy for survival reasons. So that's where our flight and fight response comes from. So that's the hormone that produces our flight or fight response. It also heightens memory functions and increases immunity and lowers sensitivity to pain and helps maintain homeostasis in the body. So these bouts of cortisol that are produced by children are actually useful and functional for their survival. Of course, as we age, too much cortisol causes all sorts of things like acne rosacea and heart disease and all sorts of things, but it's a functional part of what happens with babies. So has anyone got anything to add there?
So can that, I think in the last week we were discussing like the effects of alcohol and nicotine during pregnancy. Does that have an effect on that cortisol sort of system in the birth, like the nicotine through the blood supply and the alcohol?
That's a really interesting question. I don't really know. I haven't heard that it does, but I mean, it's a really good question. It's possible that it does.
Yeah. So I'm just writing notes down while I'm talking. So.
Yeah, no, that's all cool. I've kind of lost you from the video here, but that's okay. Yeah, maybe if one of you wants to find that out and like put it into the discussion forum, it would be really interesting to know. Yeah.
So that was cortisol, was it? Called cortisol?
Cortisol, sorry?
Just because I just sort of missed the start of the...
Oh, okay. So yeah, sorry. So babies produce a high level of cortisol, which is hydrocortisone, known as the stress hormone. So it activates cortisol secretion from the adrenal glands, and these are good for fight and flight and memory, immunity, sensitivity, lower sensitivity to pain, and helps the body kind of keep its homeostasis. So even though in large amounts in adults it's probably not a good thing, or it's definitely not a good thing, in children it's actually functions to help them develop.
Cool, gotcha.
So then we've got preterm births. So in preterm births, it actually affects cognition as well. So 40% of preterm birth babies have mild learning difficulties, behaviour disorders, lower than average IQ score. The other thing that might happen is like physical coordination difficulties might emerge during childhood. But what the research has shown here is that infants who get good quality postnatal care and attention are able to overcome developmental challenges. So even though being born preterm has a negative effect on people, it's something that you can manage via environment. So, we've been having our discussions about, what is the difference between, or not what is the difference, but we've been having discussions about the relative effects of environment and genetics and hereditary.
Yep.
So has anyone got any experiences or any kind of questions or anything to add?
I'd be interested to know, when you say preterm, is that any, like, I guess the more preterm, the more the effects, but
yeah.
Both of my children were born, I guess, at least 3 to 4 weeks early.
Yeah, I don't think this is, I think that they're talking about babies that would be defined as premature.
Yeah.
Not just like an early birth, because
Is it does that still affect, like, if they're small, like their low birth weight and things? Would that have anything to do with it?
No. This research is about premature babies. So premature. So babies that are born with low birth weight or born, a few weeks earlier, they don't need neonatal care. They're not premature babies.
Oh well, my daughter ended up in neonatal. That's all. So I wasn't sure.
Your daughter what? Sorry.
Well, even though she was only the 3 or 4 weeks early, because she was small, she did end up in NICU for a little time. I just wondered. I mean, she's now quite intelligent. So whether, like, because being a firstborn child, she got an absolute ton of attention and
yeah. Well, that's what this is saying, isn't it? I'm going to look up the definition of premature baby.
Yeah, that's why I just wasn't sure, like, how.
Before 37 weeks.
So, well, she was 37 plus 1, so...
Yeah, so she's not, I didn't think she's not technically, she technically wasn't premature. But it's like it's like the research does show that, good quality care does make all the difference here. So, interesting research. So newborn babies have a limited range, and as we all know, when we've been around newborn babies, and that's a very cute picture of one there, I have to say. They don't have the same range of emotional and physical states that we do as adults. They move in and out of 5 states of arousal. So regular sleep, irregular sleep, drowsiness, quiet alertness, and bursts of body activity and sometimes crying. And REM sleep accounts for roughly 50% of a newborn baby's sleep time, and we don't have that same amount of REM sleep as adults, where it drops to about 20%. And REM sleep is vital for growth of the nervous system. So REM sleep is rapid eye movement sleep. Now, when I was reading through this slide before, it made me think about cats as well. Like, cats communicate with their humans with sound, which is the same thing that they do with their infant, with their babies, and then that disappears over time. And I was thinking, crying is the first way that babies communicate, and they cry a lot up until about 6 weeks of life, and then for most babies it generally declines after that. So they're trying to tell us, their physical needs like hunger or changes in the environment, and temperature change, or a sudden a noise that they're responding to. These are the sorts of things that make them cry. And I'm sure we've all had. It reminded me also of a baby I saw in a ski field once, and clearly it was like really, really cold, and its parents hadn't realised how cold it was, and it was just crying and crying and crying for the cold. And then its mother covered its face up, and it stopped crying. So it's a very kind of primal kind of response, I think, for the first 6 weeks. And I've always thought that in the first 6 weeks, it's like the baby's born, but in a way, it's not quite out in the world yet. anyone else had any kind of observations of those babies in the first 6 weeks?
Yeah, I haven't had enough newborns personally, so I haven't seen enough of that stage.
Yeah. What about you, Cara? Anything you particularly observe about your kids when they're in that early kind of...
My first, she didn't stop crying for at least the first 3 months, so she screamed constantly, that one.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to get on to having a look at that, having a talk about that shortly.
Reasons for that, but yeah.
There were what, sorry?
There were actual reasons for that. She had a lot of bad silent reflux.
Ah, yes, okay.
Yeah, so, but yeah, that was a fun time, that.
Sounds like it. So touch is a well-developed sense in a newborn. So being touched and held gently helps with physical growth. And yeah, newborns are highly sensitive to pain. Like, you know, so even that baby like crying on the ski field, it was like the pain, it was experiencing pain from its face being so cold. And exposure to enduring pain can overwhelm the nervous system with stress hormones, which can disable the child's developing capacity to handle everyday stressors. And if you were at last week's Collaborate, or if you have watched it, we know that this kind of compromising of the fight and flight stress hormone kind of response can lead to complex trauma in later life. So taste and smell are reasonably sophisticated senses in the newborn. So newborn babies do tend to respond to pleasant and unpleasant tastes and odours, but of course they don't actually eat or drink very much in the first few days that they're born. And hearing improves greatly over the first few months. I wasn't so aware of this. So at birth, the auditory system isn't fully developed, and there's amniotic fluid trapped in the middle ear that needs to drain before the newborn can properly hear. And I'm sure there are some functional advantages of that, because, you know, they are quite sensitive to sound. So I assume that this kind of inability to hear in the same way that we do as adults might be an element of that.
Yeah, to give their time to adjust to the outside world sounds, yeah.
Sorry, can you move closer to the mic?
Sorry.
Right.
I was just saying, yeah, I guess that would be beneficial for their development of their hearing, so that they're not so like overwhelmed by the outside world sounds straight away. Take a while for them to adjust. Otherwise, if that amniotic fluid wasn't there,
yeah,
shock for them, I guess.
Yeah, makes sense, doesn't it? Because like when they're inside the womb, their hearing is compromised because they've got, you know, they're in that amniotic sac. I mean, they can definitely still hear inside there, and they experience vibrations. But yeah, I can imagine that it must be quite a functional thing.
So with the sensitivity you were saying before about the sensitivity to pain as a child, does that come, like the desensitizing, does that come with age or experience? So like, is it just a natural thing, or do you have to be, you know, put out into little bits of pain, then your tolerance builds? Has that been studied before, or?
I don't know. That's another interesting question, and another thing that we could bring to the discussion forum. But I imagine that it is a combination of both.
Yeah, because like, you know, if there was a child they had and they put him in a room for 10 years, didn't experience any pain or any loud noises. Well, I guess because he'd be so used to the quietness, but. Is it, you know, like I said, is it a tolerance built up, or is it just a natural part of life, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also going to be related to how you're, you know, if you feel safe, like immediately when things that affect you negatively or like make you cry as a baby, if you are made to feel safe and cared for immediately, then your tolerance for those kinds of things is going to develop in a normal way, which is to, as you said, create tolerance over time. Whereas if you are if you grow up in a place in an environment where your primary caregivers are negligent or inconsistent, then your tolerance is not going to develop in a normal way.
Yeah, so I guess like an example is like, just say you're a baby, you got pinched very lightly every day for like a year. I guess by after that year, you sort of would have built a little bit of a tolerance to that pinching. When after the end of a year, if you just never been pinched and someone came and pinched you reasonably hard, you'd probably feel a lot worse after that year.
Yeah, I did. I did read some research recently, which was about how how we have how people pinch babies' cheeks. Like they hang on, I'll just remove this so I can see you again. But how you pinch a baby's cheek like that. Evidently, the act of doing that actually is, we do it on purpose to hurt the baby a little bit, but also to kind of be there going, aren't you cute, and smiling. So the baby's hurt, but it's also seeing that, this little bit of hurt is okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That in regard to sounds, I guess it would be a conditioned response in the way that if a loud sound had no negative consequences, babies would eventually get used to it and it wouldn't be a big thing. But if a noise accompanies something, a negative experience, then obviously eventually they're going to react to that noise in a really bad way compared to,
Sorry, I missed that.
Compared to if they have the loud noise and then they get comfort and things after it.
Yeah. Okay, so vision. Vision is the least developed sense of the newborn, and that's because the structures of the eye and the brain haven't fully developed by the time babies are born. So visual acuity in the newborn's limited, and that's why we have colourful mobiles and things for children to look at, because they prefer to look at colourful objects, but they can't discriminate colours very well. And I can remember when my oldest son, who's now 28, was born, he really used to like The Simpsons, from a very young age. When he was about he was about a week or so old, and he might be starting to get a bit distressed. And if we took him in and put him in front of the TV screen with all those cartoon colours scrolling through, he would be kind of comforted by that. So that makes a lot of sense. And their sense of distance is also limited for the first 2 to 4 months, and between 5 and 12 months, infants can recognise the emotional meaning of facial expressions. So we've all done that kind of thing where we go, perhaps we haven't, but how babies like it when you go, and you do that kind of fake, kind of smiley face. Babies also like pictures of smiling faces and things as well. So their ability to kind of differentiate the real from the unreal is not as developed either.
So going back to the Simpsons reference you made.
Yeah.
So apart from the fact that they can make children's shows a lot more fantasy-like because it's a cartoon, is that also then because they can have so much more colours and it's like a cartoony thing, so it gets the sensory sort of images sort of working a lot more, keeps them engaged? How you're saying your son like The Simpsons because it had many colours and stuff?
Yeah.
So, like I said, Bugs Bunny, it's got all the colours and all the different things, but they can also make, it's something they could never make in real life. So I guess it works in both ways with the cartoon colours and then all the action they do. Is that sort of right, on the right track there?
Yep. So what happens for us as parents when we have a baby as well? So childbirth is really a profound developmental transition for parents and families. And I can remember when I was first thinking about getting pregnant, someone who I was at varsity with at the time said, Michelle, it will change your life so much. I can't even begin to explain to you how much your life is going to change, but you won't mind. And I think that was probably more a comment on me than anything else. But childbirth is really a very, it's a very kind of challenging time. And it really does change your life more than you could imagine. And then how the family or the people who are the primary carers adjust to the arrival of a newborn baby is a predictor of their ability to provide supportive, warm and stimulating environment that offers the opportunity for optimal physical, cognitive, social and emotional development. So it's like the way that you respond to that has a really big impact on your child's development. And of course, women get a lot of help with this because towards the end of pregnancy, you produce lots of oxytocin, which is also what your brain produces when you take ecstasy, which I'm sure you all know what ecstasy is. It's a drug that makes people feel good and facilitates connection with other people. And for women, it also facilitates the birth process and the letting down of milk. And it gives you that kind of calm and relaxed feeling that you get when you have a newborn baby, well, which most people get when they have a newborn baby. Expecting fathers get slight hormonal changes, but those are seen to be associated with the emotional response to infants and caregiving rather than something that happens as a hormonal part of the birthing experience. So does that resonate for you guys? The difference between women and men, and like that men have a kind of environmental response, women have more of a hormonal response?
Yeah.
And so that oxytocin development and the whole calming, would that also be that would be the chemical thing that would trigger and help like the bonding with your newborn baby and things?
Totally, absolutely, yes. Good example. Thanks, Karen. So this is Melanie Klein, who was a theorist of development, and she said that normal development, where the infant sense that a loved person can, in normal development, an infant senses that a loved person can be both bad and good, and this is kind of this is called the split. So they don't see the parent as kind of, lukewarm or, not a bad parent or whatever. They see the bad and they see the good. And it's this acceptance of the two things together which is really important for normal development, because if we don't develop it, then if we don't kind of resolve that people in our lives can be good or bad, then we end up having kind of emotional issues in later life. So the early ego relates to its objects in partial ways, and it splits the objects. So this process creates objects characterized by a particular function, feeding, holding, and so on, or objects that frustrate or gratify. So a child might prefer to be fed and held, for example, rather than have its bum changed, where they always end up crying at you. But it's the ability to learn to integrate those two things into one person, which is important for later development. So I'll see if I can find a Melanie Klein video and put some more information up about Melanie Klein so that we can watch that at a later date. Interesting theorist. So body growth. So infants double their height and triple their weight during the first year of their life. And that baby fat peaks at about 9 months and helps to regulate body temperature. And then in the second year, most toddlers slim down. So that's certainly been my experience. Yeah. And I think it's probably most children's experience in the developed world anyway.
Yeah. They start eating and then they bulk and then they start walking and then they...
That's right. So they eat a lot and then they kind of stop eating as much, but then they're growing while they're not eating as much usually, whereas when they're eating a lot, that's when they're kind of about to start growing.
Yeah, and then they run around and then that's it.
Sorry, I missed. They run around and what?
They run around and then they never stop. So they're using all that energy that they accumulated.
Yeah.
They started moving around so much.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing I always noticed anyway, is that when my children were about to start growing, even if they hadn't started growing, they'd start eating a lot more.
Yeah, definitely.
And then that kind of tapers off and they have a period of just like homeostasis for a while and then they take off again. So during infancy, boys are slightly taller and heavier than girls, but girls have a higher fat to muscle ratio. And these sex differences continue throughout childhood and peak during adolescence. And this is something that I've noticed because I live in Sydney. That's something I've noticed when people are transitioning and start to take a lot of testosterone. One of the first things that you notice is the fat to muscle ratio change. So that's obviously to do with genetics, but also with the hormones that are taken by trans men, but hormones that are naturally present in men. So growth is also obviously reflective of health and diet and the quality of life. So we see this unfortunately in Australia and relate to Aboriginal health. So in one study of Aboriginal children growing up in remote Western Australia, girls and boys were found to be shorter and lighter than urban Anglo-Australian infants. And that's hardly surprising because food and the quality of food is a real issue in a lot of remote parts of Australia. Often the food that is available is processed and not necessarily, and the availability of food is often not consistent into those areas as well. Lots of pies and chocolate milk, which doesn't make for which doesn't provide you with the best quality nutrients for growth.
So just a kind of bit of an example of that, I think 2 years ago, and I remember it very well, I was just out of Byron Bay, quite an affluent area, and I was on the beach and I was noticing with a friend the amount of healthy, fit-looking people everywhere.
Yeah.
It really stood out to me. And then we went 2 or 3 hours sort of inland and down a bit, and it was completely different. Like, a lot of obese people, a lot of smaller, unhealthy looking people, and it just really stood out. And it just shows you like what your environment can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And my partner was the CEO for a company that did education services in remote Australia for a while, and he would go out and visit sometimes. And he said one night he went to get something for dinner, and the only thing like left was a cheesecake in the freezer. It was like the only thing left to eat. And he said people also like queue in the mornings and get pies and chocolate milk. So
well, this place we went to, I think the busiest place in the town was the greasy fish and chip shop.
But it's also to do with like education and transport, because there's just a whole raft of things that go into lack of nutrition and lack of healthy opportunities. Okay, so at birth, our brain is about 25% of its adult weight, but by the end of the second year, it increases to 80% of its adult weight. So that's a huge increase in a small period of time, isn't it? Infancy is a time of rapid neurocognitive development. So learning to talk, learning to walk, developing fine motor skills, recognising objects and letters and pictures and all sorts of things. So at birth, most of the 1 or 2 billion neurons and basic cells of the brain and the nervous system aren't connected, but during the first 2 years, the brain establishes billions of new connections between neurons called synapses, and the network of neurons becomes increasingly complex. Some of the stuff that we're learning in this subject really reminds me of high school. Anybody else? Do you remember doing all of this stuff about synapses and genomes and genetics and the double helix and stuff at high school?
Vaguely some of it.
I probably wasn't paying attention in that part.
Maybe I just liked science. So the proliferation, and it's also, it's not something that you kind of, that I've thought about much since, but when I started to look through this subject at the beginning of trimester, I was like, oh yeah, okay, I remember all of this stuff. So the proliferation of neural connections allows the brain to construct pathways of information based on stimulation and experience that the infant receives from the physical and social world. So this is more stuff about environment and the importance of environment, and the general order in which the regions of the brain develop corresponds with the emergence of various capacities, for example, auditory, visual, motor cortexes, etc., etc. And I have seen a lot of developmental movies where, you know, people will experiment with babies rolling and sitting and grasping objects and things like that. And these different abilities do develop at particular times in the pattern of development of children. So environment is also important in for brain development, which is why we play, you know, we've got baby Mozart, we play babies' music, we let them watch television every now and again, we read them books, we do interactive things with them on the internet. All of these things that we do with our children are designed to stimulate their growth and their capacity to understand. And of course, there's the famous study of Romanian orphanages where children were hardly touched, and they ended up with impaired development. Have you guys all remember that?
No.
The 1980s, I think. So yeah, there's. I'll see if I can find a short clip about that as well, because it's really kind of interesting. And when they took the children away and started to, or when they took them out of those orphanages, or if they employed someone in the orphanage who actually gave the children hugs, then they would start to develop.
Yeah, in leaps and bounds.
Mm.
Yeah, I watched one on a little video on YouTube Saturday, something about that. It was about they took a monkey away from its mother.
Yeah.
And they gave it just a metal. They made up a metal kind of feeding. Just to feed off, and they made one out of metal, and they made another one that had like a blanket on it that had the smell of its mum.
Yeah.
And if it's always stayed with the one with the smell of its mum, and it would just lean over to get the food, and that made its development a lot better and a lot healthier.
God, what a horrible experiment.
Yeah, they did say that at the start. They were like, this was not a nice experiment, but someone done it in the 70s or something.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure they still get done, they probably just don't get talked about anymore. So what were we going to say, Chris?
No, that's it.
Okay. So then hereditary. So we're looking at hereditary now. So when diet and health are adequate, physical growth is determined by hereditary. And we all see that in the patterns of our families as well. So, for example, my oldest son, again, he's vegetarian. He's been vegetarian his whole life. He doesn't like to exercise. He's quite introverted, but he looks like he eats lots of meat and goes to the gym. He's huge. And I could never work out where that came from. And then I saw a picture of my granddad in the 1960s, a picture that had been taken for the newspaper, and he was like head and shoulders above everybody else there at the time. And I assume that would have been partly because he had good health and nutrition, probably compared to people in pre-war Britain, but also because he was because of genetics. So even if there's a brief period of dietary inadequacy, children typically return to their genetically influenced path of growth later when conditions improve. But long-term malnutrition can compromise development. And actually, my dad said that during the war, they used to go to the health nurse, and she had bottles of vitamin E oil that they used to give out, and my dad said he can remember drinking it and telling his mum that he'd had lemonade because he had rickets and he needed the oil, and it tasted so good to him. So I guess like our bodies are constantly trying to go back to homeostasis, because I can't imagine any child who wasn't malnourished drinking vitamin E oil and saying it was lemonade.
Doing it.
So the energy that infants need is twice as much as adults, and its nutrition is especially crucial for physical and cognitive development during infancy, and this is where breastfeeding is, I guess, seen to be the best solution for children in most circumstances, and the World Health Organization recommends breastfeeding for the first 2 years of development, with the inclusion of solid foods at 6 months. And of course that's going to be different for different kids and different body types, but these are some standards that have been developed. So classical conditioning, which is, it was a classic experiment by Pavlov's dog. The dog was fed, and when he was fed, a bell was rung, and then after some time, then the bell being rung was enough to stimulate the dog to start salivating. So that's what that's about. So when a neural stimulus is presented with a stimulus that evokes a reflexive response, the infant's nervous system is capable of connecting the two stimuli, and the neutral stimuli will then produce the behaviour by itself, which is basically that Pavlov's dog experiment that I was just telling you about, where the bell was rung and the dog would salivate. So this allows the infant to recognise the contingency of everyday events and to predict the environment. So it's how we learn. So in operant conditioning, infants learn by the response they receive from operating or enacting on their environment, and if their behaviour is reinforced, it increases the probability of it recurring more frequently, and if it's punished, it decreases the probability of the behaviour occurring. So sucking is reinforced by the sweetness of the milk, and when infants taste something sour, they generally get upset and stop sucking or stop drinking or spit things out. So newborns also have that primitive ability to learn through imitation. So sometimes when you smile at a very young baby, it will appear to smile back at you, although the research says it's not actually smiling. I have my doubts. I think it might actually be smiling. I'd like to think that anyway.
Well, it works when you stick out your tongue too. That's it.
Yeah.
You stick out your tongue and they stick it out.
Anything funny. So motor skills facilitate movement and exploration within the world. So, sitting, crawling, rolling, which in turn leads to learning and development of social competencies. So gross motor development is control over actions that enable infants to hold up their heads, crawl, stand, and eventually walk. And then our fine motor development controls smaller movements such as reaching and grasping. And of course, these develop more in some people than they do over time. I was friends with a whole lot of art conservators for a while, and their fine motor skills were absolutely astounding. The things that they can do, I will never be able to do. So often when children are learning their gross motor skills, it's accompanied by advancements in fine motor coordination as well. So between 4 and 7 months, an infant shows preferences for musical phrasing, and auditory ability develops, and inroads are made into exploration of the world. So newborns prefer the sound and rhythm of humans spoken in the tongue that they're used to, but by around 5 years, infants become sensitive to stress patterns and intonations also. Between 7 and 9 months, they start to recognise familiar words spoken in passages. So, that's when we start asking them, would you like a drink or would you like something to eat and stuff like that, and you kind of get some kind of response from children during that time. And because communication is a multi-sensory process, infants receive visual and tactile support for their analysis of speech. So I said we'd get on to temperament and personality, which we will right now. So temperament refers to the early appearing stable difference in reactivity, attention, which is attention and arousal, and self-regulation. So children are really, really different in terms of their temperaments. I remember one of my sisters really screamed a lot, and she still has that kind of ability to be kind of triggered very easily by things which I don't see in the rest of my family. So children definitely have, and I've seen that with my children as well, they definitely have a kind of temperament or a way of being in the world. So research has been done on temperament, and it's been divided into 3 categories, so the easy child, the difficult child, and then the slow to warm up child. So temperament is really saying that there is a genetic foundation for individual differences in personality, but also the environment has a powerful influence. So lots of different pieces of research coming from lots of different perspectives, where, is it an environment, is it kind of hereditary? But it's definitely like a sense of both. In fact, my sister was standing in her kitchen this morning, and she had this kind of look on her face, and I was like, oh my God, you look just like Dad, because that's what Dad used to do in the morning. He'd kind of come out with this kind of, and then have his first sip of tea, and then he'd get this like look of delight on his face, and she was doing that, and she goes, oh yeah, that must have been like learned behaviour. And I was like, yeah, definitely. And I was like, I'm going to use this example this morning. So emotional development. So at 4 or 5 months, infants are able to feel and recognise emotional expressions in the faces of their caregivers. They use social referencing, which allows them to interpret uncertain situations by reading the emotion on their caregiver's face. So besides these both basic emotions, second higher order feelings such as guilt, shame, embarrassment, jealousy and pride begin to appear at around 18 months. And they're called self-conscious emotions because they involve injury or enhancement of our sense of self. So we're starting to develop our sense of self, moving beyond hereditary and genetic kind of influences, and developing our own sense of self at this stage. Okay, so we started to look at attachment theory last week, and again, we're going to we'll probably look at it quite a lot in this course, because you remember that Bowlby and attachment theory is related to complex trauma in later life. So if we are securely attached to our caregivers, so for example, what did we talk about earlier? When you hear a loud noise and you are hugged, or when someone pinches your cheek and also kind of smiles at you and makes it okay, and where you cry because you are hungry and you get fed, and everything is consistent there, then you are able to form relationships easily in later life. If you experience rejection by your primary caregivers, and you're discouraged from showing your feelings, you're taught that you need to be able to cope with things, then you can become quite ambivalent in older age. So you might have much less difficulty walking away from an intimate relationship, for example. If you get mixed messages and your primary caregivers are unpredictable, then you might become anxious and avoidant of others in later life. And if you experience abuse, or have a primary caregiver that's unavailable, or maybe those, or definitely actually those children that grew up in the Romanian orphanages, then your way of dealing with others in the world will be disorganised, so you'll be inconsistent as an adult. So, how important do you think secure infant attachment is to a caregiver is for later adult functioning?
how important.
Does that kind of Bowlby's theory, does that kind of logically make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Quite a good, easy way to understand as well.
Yeah. And of course there are permutations of all of those ways of being in the world. And we learn through environment as we grow up, and we, create, and we learn about ourselves. We can learn about our responses as we age. I think it's quite a good theory. And of course, another one of the criticisms of those theories is that they're all very much middle class theories. They are based on the idea that the woman is the primary caregiver, that children exist in a nuclear family and may not work so well for different cultures where people are brought up in different ways. So I might just stop the recording now.